Julian, Sunday fun day.
Well, Joey, welcome back to Nova Legends podcast. I mean,
Like,
yeah, I got such great feedback on the South Lakes one we did a few weeks ago. I think people were glad to see all of you guys, and I don't think a lot of people have heard from you since you graduated from South Lakes, and they were just really glad to see you and that you're thriving.
yeah, man. No, it was like I said, I felt like I was going 100 miles an hour down memory lane. I hadn't talked to a lot of those guys for a while, man. It's funny. Some of my best friends are still guys that I went to Terracet with, and I mean Quinn and Troy, Rob. Like I've reconnected since that podcast with all those guys, and which is great. It's one of those things, man. You get older, you get kids, careers, life gets in the way, and it's it's fun to have these types of platforms and these types of initiatives kind of bring everybody back together. But yeah, it was a blast. And then just kind of hearing some of those stats and remembering kind of how many people, Coach Byrd helped put to Division I programs, and then the amount of athletes coming out of Northern Virginia is just mind blowing. I actually went and kind of dug into some of your podcasts and saw some of the names and some of the personalities that you've interviewed, and once again was just unaware of just how many prominent athletes, both from a sports perspective, but from an administrative perspective, coaching perspective. It's a hotbed of talent, man. It was a true hotbed of talent. So it's cool that you've kind of stoked the fires of the Northern Virginia legends, so to speak. I appreciate you doing that.
Well, thanks for those kind words, and thanks for participating, because just to give people broad strokes of your career for those who may have forgotten. I mean, you're arguably one of the best public high school players in the history of Northern Virginia. I think we got a poll on our site, and other than Grant, I mean, I guess a strong argument can be made you're the best player in the history of the area, and that includes David Robinson, who wasn't a great high school player, and quite others. You were a second team parade high school All-American. Grant, Tommy Amaker, Crawford Palmer, and Scotty Reynolds were third teamers. Pete Holbert, and then a guy named Ed Hummer, who played back in the 60s. Actually played at Princeton. They were fourth teamers, but you were second team. You won 3 regional championships as a starter. So you really, and then you went to Duke, and then you transferred to Boston. Had a great career there. Scored in double figures 3 years. Shot over 50% each year, and then you had a long career over in Europe. So I mean, when you're at the very top of all these great athletes that we've produced.
Yeah, the good old days, man. It's funny. It's everybody, it's just my name and Grant's name seem kind of, always are correlated together, right? Because there's the South Lakes and the Duke connection as well. Obviously Grant has had an extremely successful, professional career, and then professional executive career as well, with everything that he's done after basketball. And, who deserves it better than that guy, man? I mean, he is just, just the salt of the earth, super happy for him. Obviously him being part owner of the Atlanta Hawks, I'll bump into him from time to time when we're both at games. But it's always funny because there's some debate out there, depending on what platform you come from, but I'm still the leading scorer at South Lakes history. And that's the one feather in my cap that I have over G. But, and then obviously with the awards were unbelievable, 2, Gatorade Players of the Year, ironically, being Player of the Year over Allen Iverson and Joe Smith, who were both #1 picks, right? So like, the high school, the glory days, man, they were fantastic. And then, I went to Duke, and, once again, I don't regret my decision to go there. It was, there was a lot of kind of, questions and uncertainty, right? Because I came out, I transferred the same year that Coach K had kind of taken his sabbatical, when he had some back issues and needed to unplug a little bit to kind of get his health right. That was the year that the team kind of started sliding a little bit. First time that I think they hadn't made the tournament in a long time. And like I said, I'd been getting calls for, a decade afterwards. Hey, what happened? What happened? And really what happened was, I came there and I was a little bit impatient, didn't respond, terribly well to kind of understanding that I was probably going to be, fighting for more playing time my junior, senior year. And it was much as my fault as anybody else's, not to approach the situation a little bit differently. But, I was 18, I was young, I was arrogant, I was ready to go. And it just was a situation that just didn't work out. So many people still like, oh my gosh, you went to Duke, why would you ever leave? And I'm like, I ended up at BU, and I had a freaking fantastic time, had a really good career, met a lot of really good friends, and it got me to the next level. So, and I met my wife, clearly, which as a result now have a family in Atlanta. Yeah, it's funny, man. I mean, once again, I don't, I don't regret anything. If I had it to do all over again, I may have approached the situation a little bit differently.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And that's all it was. It wasn't regrets. It was just, I'm older now. Now I look at things a little bit more strategically. Had I looked at it differently, obviously UVA would have been a really good fit for me as well. Being they had just won the NIT, they had a young core of guys with Corey and Junior, and I was very friendly with Jeff Jones and Dennis Wolfe. But it was Duke, and at the end of the day, it's like, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, like Duke is not a bad choice ever. Obviously I would have liked it to go a little bit differently. But a few bumps in the road, man. It's like, I ended up going in a different direction, and, I couldn't have asked for a better, situation. Obviously it would have been nice to make the league. Didn't happen, but, the journey that I had for 12 years in Europe was, one that, even playing in the NBA, other than the number of zeros on my contract, I don't know if it could have been any better, because I just had such a wonderful experience, getting to know different people, different cultures, different customs, different environments. It was just playing over in Europe is a totally different ball game than any experience that you'll ever have in America. So had a blast, man. And I've never looked back, truly.
Still more zeros that I make. So, what and I know these are different times because of the transfer portal and stuff, but generally, what advice do you give to top players now? I mean, do you go somewhere where you're going to play and you're not struggling to be on that top 5 that you're going to play, or do you try to get to the best team possible, best program? When people ask you that question, how do you answer it?
I mean, I think that what you do is you got to understand what you want to get out of it. I mean, are you trying to be a top 5 pick? Are you just trying to make the NBA? Are you trying to, have, multiple avenues in case, you may not be an NBA player, maybe you're more of a European player. What do you want to get out of it? Once again, in every decision, that's a decision that's a really hard decision for a 17 or 18-year-old to make. You're committing the next 4 years, although with a lot of the one and done guys, you're committing 1 year. But once again, it's like, I know when the Caliparis and with the Krzyzewskis and Hubert Davises now, like they're coming and saying, hey, look, do you want to be on national TV, 20, 25 times a year? Or do you want to go to kind of a mid-major and maybe score 25 points a game, but nobody sees you? My theory is, and now Kenny Blakeney over at Howard, obviously he's starting to do some really cool things at that university, in fact, enticing some of the top recruits to actually come there now, which I think is fantastic, because the world's so small now, between the internet. I mean, really it is the internet, right? Like that makes the world small. If you're good, they're going to find you, and I feel that the NBA, it's not about, once again, what do I know, right? This is just a guy who sells cybersecurity, who still has a passion for basketball, who kind of looks at things from a different lens. But, for me, NBA is not about, your production. It's about your ceiling. It's about your potential, so when you're 18 years old, I just don't think it really, if you're one of these top 5 picks, top 10 picks, you got to go somewhere where you really trust the coach, right? I think that's a big thing, like really trust the coach. And obviously, these guys, I don't even know what the recruiting rules are anymore. I mean, I was getting letters when I was in 7th grade, right? So I don't know if that's even allowed anymore. I would imagine with texting and with these social media platforms and, that you might be able to build trust quicker with a coach. Once again, I don't know. I had a really good relationship with the coaching staff at Duke, and there was trust there. I had a really, really strong relationship with the coaching staff at UVA as well. So I do think that sometimes it's a gut feeling, right? You're 18 years old. Who do you line up better with? Who has your best interest at hand, right? Because at the end of the day, big time Division I programs, it's funny, right? We talk about this, I'm a businessman now, right? I was an athlete. Athletes always want to be really good businessmen, right? Like they get invested in different ventures and sometimes they go sideways. And some businessmen want to be really, really good athletes. But I feel like these big time Division I programs are run like a corporation. They're run like an organization. Your coach is your CEO. You have a marketing department. There is a finance department, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it, right? But there's still, there's ways to connect, with financial possibilities with recruits, and it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of how the game goes. There's a whole social media department now, and really, it's like, do you buy into the culture here? Do you believe in the culture? Do you believe in our vision? And I really think it is about establishing, as much trust as you possibly can with that coaching staff to say, hey, look, these are my goals. How are you going to help me meet my objectives? It's a tough call, man. I mean, it really is. I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer. I would just say, get somebody that you trust to help you make that decision, to help navigate that decision. I talked to, and it's got to be so challenging for coaches now with the way that the transfer portal is, because once again, if I had gone, when I left Duke, the first thing that popped in my mind was going to UVA. But at the time, the NCAA rules were, had I transferred, I would have had to sit out 2 years because it was interconference, and I would have lost a year of eligibility as well. So that went right out the window. Nowadays, if I had, after my first semester of my freshman year, if I wanted to leave, I could have, and I would have been playing the next year, which is just another, probably a topic for another day. But the NCAA, I think there's some cracks in the dam that probably need to be sealed a little bit. And once again, fortunately, I'm not in that position to make those decisions. But I guess getting back to your answer, it's just like, who's your core? Is it your mother? Is it your AAU coach? Is it your cousin? Is it your high school coach? Get some people that you trust around you so that they can help kind of navigate that decision. And then when you're looking at universities, once again, I've changed career 3 or 4 times. And every time I do, I write a list. Here are the pros, here are the cons. What outweighs each other? You know what I mean? Yeah. More money, more hours, tougher culture, or much better culture, much more flexibility, a little bit less money. And it all just kind of depends on where you want to be in your life. But once again, I'm 46 years old, right? I've been there. How do you tell that to a 17 or 18-year-old kid? You know what I mean? That's a tough decision to make for these kids, for sure.
46 sounds really young to me. So the portal thing, you think it was a good thing that you had to really think about transferring, because you had to stay out a year. It would have been 2 years at UVA. It would have been a year at Boston University. Nowadays, you could transfer right away and just play. Yeah. I take pictures of almost every game that I go to. I love taking sports photography. And I went to the Illinois UVA game, and I took pictures of this running back for Illinois. And then I just sent it to him on Instagram, and we started communicating a little bit. And he thanked me. And turns out he was a 22-year-old sophomore. His name is Chase something. And then he had a great year. He'd already transferred once. And then I just saw in the paper the other day, he's going, or on the internet the other day, he's going to Miami. He transferred again. So do you think it was good in that you had to really think about it? You had to talk to Coach Byrd, you had to talk to your parents, or do you think, look, let's not waste any time. Right. Duke's not going to work for me. I want to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, once again, I'm not in that position anymore. So I think it's just, I think it's a setup to allow people to tap out, so quickly, right? On the other side of that, it's like, listen, if I'm just a normal student and I'm going to Duke University and you know what, it's not working out and I want to go to UVA or I want to go somewhere else, I have all the ability to do that, right? However, once again, Duke is making a financial commitment to you from a scholarship perspective, and not just Duke, but any school that kids go to on a Division I scholarship. So I just don't think it's good I don't think it's good for sports, man. I think it's, it just, first of all, it makes coaching really hard. Second of all, it makes brand loyalty really hard, right? Like people want to support the Dukes and the UNCs and the UVAs and the Michigans and everywhere else. But it's really hard to when you want to get to know these athletes, you want to get to know these personalities, and if they have the ability to leave every year, it's like it's hard to almost emotionally commit to that individual. Once again, I don't necessarily agree with it, but on the other side of the coin, it's like if I'm trying to get to the NBA or if I'm trying to do reach my goals, having an exit strategy, is quite convenient. Mm-hmm. So I think for the players, it's really convenient. I think for the programs and the coaches, it's unfortunate. For the coaches, once again, as a coach, it's like, well, I don't know if Joey's going to stay or not. But then on the other side of the coin, let's say Jerry Stackhouse wasn't happy at Carolina. He's like, well, we might have a chance to get Jerry because he's not happy after year one. Not saying that Jerry was unhappy at Carolina, but once again, there's two sides to every story. And for me, it was good. I think it was good because once again, after my freshman year, when, it was just didn't play much. I mean, we had a heck of a run, right? Like, lost Arkansas in the Final Four, in the finals, in the national championship game. and I kind of had a come to Jesus moment, right? Like I had a bit of a wake up call and said, you know what? I didn't approach that very well. And what I probably would have done would have been, I probably would, after the last day of the season, I probably would have left. I probably would have gone somewhere else. But what it did was force me to kind of look at myself, see what I could have done differently to try and, get a little bit more playing time, make the situation a little bit better. And then unfortunately, I broke my ankle the last week of the season. And so I was basically in a cast my entire summer year. So we were supposed to go to Australia that year. Unfortunately, some of the freshmen didn't perform, didn't get enough credits to be eligible. And we'll just, I'll leave myself out of that group because I actually did pretty well my freshman year. However, unfortunately, we weren't able to go. So I was in a cast the entire summer while I was in Durham. Sophomore year, I said, you know what, water under the bridge, let's approach it a little bit differently. First week it was literally midnight madness. I ended up getting mono. And so now I had mono because once again, I came back, I need to work a little bit harder. I need to get in the gym a little bit more. I still needed to, get my studies done. And it just was an unfortunate situation where I got mono. At that point, I got mono, and then I was going to be out probably 4 to 6 weeks. Coach K and I talked about potentially redshirting that year. And once again, I'm like, no, I don't want to redshirt like I'd sat all last year. And that's kind of where things started kind of, go a little bit shaky. Ironically, I left. I was going to have to redshirt anyway, So once again, it was just in my head, like once I was 18 years old, I was like, no, I dug my heels in and this is what I want to do. So for me, I think it was good that, I couldn't have that out clause right away. It made me, it chose me to really kind of understand, what do I want out of this? Like I came to Duke, didn't necessarily work out. And who knows, Julian, if I had stayed for another year or two, it may have been a completely different story. But what's looking in the rear view going to do? I could have gone to Michigan. I could have gone to UCLA. I could have gone to Kentucky, but I needed to go somewhere where I really, had a good, strong, relationship with the coaching staff. And Dennis Wolfe was just a guy that I'd been talking to since I was, 13, 14 years old. And that's kind of that's kind of the direction I went. And so by me having to kind of really consider things, it just made me think about things a little bit more, made me grow up a little bit, like so that I can just be like, hey, I'm not just going to jump to the next big shiny toy, right? Like Duke was a really, really shiny toy. And I was a 6'10" dude, who, was in the same category, in discussions as like a Leitner and a Mike Jaminski and a Mark Allery and, Danny Ferry and all those guys. Right. So once again, and I got, that was where my head was at. When I left, I really had to put some thought into like, okay, what do I want out of this? Because at one point I was ready to just go to Virginia Tech and just be a student. It wasn't a fun experience for me. And, so fortunately, I talked to my mom, talked to Coach Wolfe, and we said, let's give it a shot. Let's give it a go, see how it goes. And it all worked out, man. So it's a tough world though, with that transfer portal the way it is, 18-year-old kids now. I mean, now all of a sudden they can get paid as well, right? Like that's a whole different ball game. So it's a complicated situation right now.
Well, Virginia Tech has a basketball team, and you would have found your way on that team as well.
I probably would have. In my mind, I was just going to hang out and buy nickel drafts.
They could have used you also. Yeah. So you mentioned last time that you've been identified with that 1 year of Duke your whole life. So you've accomplished a lot in high school. You've had a great career overseas. Yeah. You've had success in business, but people still, when they identify Joey Byrd, it's the Duke player.
Yeah.
Has that been a good thing for your career? Has that been a challenge? How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, Julia, it sounds like you're in sales. I'm in sales, right? So like I can play both sides of the coin, right? Especially when it comes to, that now this is from a superficial sales perspective, right? Like I can play the whole Carolina Duke thing, right? Like my wife's, several of her family members went to Carolina. So I'm the guy who went to Duke. I could either be like, I went to Duke, you went to Carolina, or I could be like, oh, I actually left Duke, so I'm friends with you guys. You know what I mean? So really for me, it's been more of a gift than anything else, just because anytime I'm calling a customer, if for some reason they're a basketball fan, then, and most likely they at least know about Duke. And for whatever reason, man, even, 25 years down the road, like people still remember Joey Byrd and Duke. And I'm not saying everybody that I come across, but enough people, if I meet somebody in an airport in Ann Arbor, you know what I mean? We'll be talking, where'd you play basketball? Yeah, I went to Duke for a little bit. Oh yeah, I remember you, why'd you leave? When'd you go? And, so yeah, it hasn't been a gift. It hasn't been a curse whatsoever, man. I mean, I think, once again, it's all how you approach it. I could sit and regret and say, oh man, I should have, stayed another year or two. I should have given it a shot, but wasted energy, man. That's the way I look at it. So yeah, for me, it's just like, and it was like, at the end of the day, it was an unbelievable experience. I mean, playing for Coach K, playing alongside like Grant and Cherokee Parks, and being part of like some of these amazing games, where I had the best seat in the house for a lot of those, it's and I got to play. I mean, it's not like I didn't play, I had some games where I got some minutes, got some points. So yeah, it's not a bad thing at all, man. I look at it as nothing but positive.
I'm going to put this on LinkedIn. So just tell us what you're doing now. What exactly do you sell? And tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah. So about a year ago, and I've kind of, I've changed directions with my career probably 4 or 5 times since I retired from basketball back in 2008, 2009. So for the past year, I've been working for a company called CrowdStrike, which is a fully cloud native cybersecurity solution. And it's been a really, really awesome experience. I've had a good friend kind of open the door for me, put me in front of a couple folks, said, look, you don't have any experience. However, I'm going to put you in front of these folks. How does your former experience, how can you apply it towards this, a new industry that you don't really know, with arguably a new product that nobody's ever really seen. So if you can do that, then I'm confident that you'll be able to succeed. So I've been doing that for about a year now. I sell to healthcare, and obviously, with all the ransomware going on in healthcare, with the Great Resignation, right? COVID has just put the world upside down, especially in a healthcare perspective. It's awesome to know that every day that I get to talk to a customer that we're really helping, protect lives here. Because I've seen, unfortunately, I've been a part of calls where, hospitals have been breached, networks have been locked up, data has been encrypted. And these guys are stuck, and there's people's lives at line. So for me, like, it makes me feel good that every day I wake up, I get to help hospitals, and arguably I get to help save people's lives. So it's been good, man. Love the company, love the culture. And once again, a lot of ex-athletes in sales, obviously, as you know. So, I've already got a couple bets. Our fiscal year ends on Monday, and it's January 31st. So I've got a couple bets in place, friendly bets with some fellow athletes about, who's going to hit their number and who's going to exceed it. So yeah, it's been a good run so far.
Yeah, you get the same competitive juices in sales as you get in basketball.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah. So, one thing that you've been able to overcome, I should say, or take advantage of, is you have this long European career. And a lot of athletes go through this where, and you're better than 99%, but they don't make the NBA and they want to play in Europe. The problem is, when you go play in Europe, you have great experiences. Sometimes, like you can make a lot of money because you play in big leagues. Others don't. Others play in Jordan or Japan, whatever, especially if they have European ancestry or whatever. But when they come back to America, sometimes they feel like they got to start their career over again. So how do you advise basketball players that want to play in Europe? You always say, look, you got to try it for a couple of years, then come back. Or I guess it all depends on how you do when you get over there.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right, man. I mean, my first year in Europe was much different than my last year in Europe, but from a financial perspective. Fortunately, I was able to attain my Italian citizenship through my grandparents. So for me, it was, by my third year, obviously you're only allowed 2 Americans on each team over there. I got to play as an Italian citizen. So, I spent 8 years in Italy playing as an Italian national player. Which just, once again, opened the door to, bigger opportunities, better opportunities. Because typically the 2 Americans that are going to be on those teams are guys who are either on the bubble of making the NBA, or guys who have just, spent a year or 2 in the NBA, came back to Europe and are trying to get back. For guys going, having the opportunity to play, once again, some guys are making, $2,000 a month. Other guys are making $200,000 a month, right? Like, I mean, the spectrum is far and wide. My thing would be do it, first of all. Do it, whether it's for a year or 2, absolutely do it. Because, especially from a sales perspective, man, I mean, people are buying from people, right? If you're a good storyteller, and you believe in what you're selling, like, you're going to do okay, right? And I feel like being in Europe is it's such a, people have this perception of it being such a romantic lifestyle. And it is, in a way, it truly is. But at other times, you're away from your family for 10 months at a time. You're practicing 6 hours a day, 3 in the morning, 3 in the evening, sometimes in gyms that don't have heat, sometimes at gyms that don't have air conditioning. You got to fight for your check every month, because it's not like America, right? Like, if you're not playing well, they'll find a way to kind of, drag your check. So then all of a sudden you're kind of playing for free. So, once again, I think that goes into research. Understand what team you're going for. You got to establish it with a good agent who understands that market and that particular team, because a team that's offering you, whatever, $100,000 a year, but are notorious for not paying, you may want to reconsider if there's a team offering you $75,000 a year, but you're going to get your check, on the first of every month. So, one thing I would encourage people in going over is really, get with an agent or representative that you can build trust with. And that's hard to do. Once again, that's hard to do in a short period of time, because they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. The other thing I think, when you go over, have a game plan. You know what I mean? Have a plan B, because very rarely are you ever going to be able to go to Europe and then retire, on what you've made. It's just not really the case all that often. You know what I mean? So you're always going to have to work. So, what I started doing was a couple years before I stopped, before I retired, and I retired several times. I tried to retire once, and, that life was just too good. So I went back again, and I went back again. But what I did start to do when I was home, I would start looking at industries that I was interested in, and I would just start reaching out to folks and just asking for some time. Hey, tell me about, I'm interested in cable, right? Tell me about, I'd find somebody on LinkedIn, or even before that time, friends of friends, right? Because at that point, a lot of it was networking, just who you knew, how could you get in front of people? So obviously I was a huge sports fan, and I always thought sports representation was something that I'd really like to do. And so I ended up, through my agent, obviously talk to him, see if he might need a side man. He was kind of a one-man show. I had other agents that would reach out to me. So then I just call them, some European based, some American based. And I would just start asking for their time. Hey, talk to me about what you like about what you're doing. How hard was it to break in there? What are some of the challenges? What do you like most about it? And honestly, I talked to a gentleman, at a prominent representation firm based in Northern Virginia. And he said, you know what, man, I had a good relationship with him. He's like, this is a grind, man. This is tough. There's a lot of luck that's involved in this, because, as an agent, you can start developing a relationship with a player, his 8th, 9th grade year in high school, right? And you got to, all of a sudden you feel like his mother is the big decision maker. So you start really focusing on, on his mom, because that she's going to have a lot of influence. Come to find out 2-3 years later, you might understand, like, his mother has no influence. It really is his AAU coach. And then you got to start that relationship. And he's, at the end of the day, he gave me a prime example where he had a big time player, who he was working with. One of this big time player's teammates was now looking for representation. My guy thought he had it. And then, in the 25th hour, he gets a call from one of the more prominent brands, players in the NBA, to say, hey, you need to jump on with my guy. And in less than 24 hours, that big opportunity for, to represent this player was gone. And so that really kind of put it in perspective, be like, yeah, you know what? I don't know if I'm ready to kind of commit, 5-6 years and then potentially lose things, right? For me, I was looking for a job that I could be passionate about. But at the time, I'd been traveling all over the world. So for me, what I wanted was a job that I could, establish roots, like I want to be somewhere and not have to move for a while, if ever. And so obviously, being an agent, I would have probably been on a plane quite a bit. That wasn't something that I was really interested in doing, because I'd done it for so long. So that really kind of made me think, like, you know what, maybe a traditional corporate America job is where I want to be. Maybe the 401k and the stock purchase program and the biweekly check, the good health care, all the benefits, going to an office and getting in front of a computer, drinking my coffee, talking to folks and climbing that corporate ladder. Maybe that's what I wanted. And so that's what I did. I got involved with HBO and then Comcast. So both big, HBO at the time was owned by Time Warner, and it's sold a few times, but both big prominent Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 companies. And that for me was a really good fit. And so when once I had a couple people that I knew who'd gotten into cable. So even before I retired, in the summertime, I would reach out, just say, hey, can we grab coffee? Can we grab lunch? And I never had one person not take that meeting because they're like, wait, you lived in Europe for 12 years? Like you played in Rome, you played in Milan, you played in Moscow. I want to hear about that. And so you really have, it's like strike while the iron's hot, right? 2-3 years after your career is over, a lot harder. I mean, it's still a cool story, but when you're in the middle of it and you don't need the job, you really are just kind of laying down the foundation. I think that makes people think too, like, this guy's pretty sharp. He's being proactive and not reactive now. And that's kind of how it seemed to work out. And once again, I went from cable to the service industry, to distribution, to cyber sales, right? And was able to pivot, pretty seamlessly. Every time I start a new career, man, like you always get those nerves. It's like, oh, it's game time now, and like, like the that internal competition starts itself, like Tommy's been there for 5 years and he's hitting, he's at 150%. I was like, I'm going to get there in a year, so then all of a sudden it starts getting me competitive again too. But I would absolutely say, take advantage of Europe. If you can do it, do it. Even if you're playing in Ireland for $1,000 a month, or you're playing in, in Moscow for $1 million a year, do it, but have a game plan. Start formulating that game plan day one, because the more time you put into it, the less time you're going to have to put into it. And after you're done, and now you're approaching it from a place of panic or fear almost, like, oh, what do I do next? What do I do next? Whereas you kind of establish at least a few directions. I just think that makes you look better as a potential candidate if you're putting the time in and building the foundation and really approaching it from a proactive stance and not a reactive. So take advantage of Europe, but also before you retire, start trying to connect with people and build your network.
Would you have considered corporate gigs overseas? I mean, did you enjoy the European culture?
Loved it. Loved the European culture. Had a chance when my last 3 years, I was playing for a team in Milan, Armani Jeans Milan. So Giorgio Armani had purchased the team. He was building the team, kind of use it as a marketing engine. He had every year we were branded a different one of his conglomerates. And he really wanted to kind of, Milan at one point, Bob McAdoo and Mike D'Antoni, like these guys were, Milan was one of the prominent European teams in Europe for a long, long time. So Giorgio wanted to kind of capture that glory and really kind of brand Armani so that Armani was known as a championship organization. So because I was able to speak Italian, and really the last couple of years of my career, I became kind of the locker room, the bench guy, right? Like I would still play, but my performance off the court outweighed my performance on the court. And I think that, Giorgio had hired his president, basically as president of the entire group to be the president of the basketball organization as well. And this gentleman named was Livio Proli. He's an awesome guy, self-made, but didn't know how to build a basketball program. And he really applied, I think, this is my take, building a corporate team is a little bit different than building an athletic team, right? Like there's some of the same things that go into it, but chemistry is such a big part of any organization, but especially on the basketball court. And because, Giorgio bought the team, so Milan had a pretty good budget, and they would just go after the players with the best stats that happened to be the most expensive ones, right? And it was sort of year one, it was sort of a failed science experiment. It just didn't work out. Like it was championship or bust. And so over time, because I was team captain, I got to be friendly with him and just kind of started sharing my 2 cents. Like, hey, just because he's scoring, 25 a game doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to go really well with this guy, who's scoring 25 as well. I had to explain the not enough balls for everybody kind of philosophy, and I think he started to understand that a little bit. So he restructured kind of how he was, building the team. And when I decided to retire, I had just signed a 3-year deal with Milan. So that was going to be my last hurrah. After year one, I had some back injuries, and that was kind of when, the economy was, starting to, it was in full tank mode. And I just felt like, not making enough money to really justify me starting a new career when I'm 33, 34, 35. I'm still in my early 30s. So, and we as a family were kind of ready to tap out and go home. And he asked me if I would, be part of the management team, with Olympia Milano, or Giorgio Armani Jeans Milano, I guess is what they're called. And I would have loved that opportunity. Like for me, a dream job is to be a general manager of a professional organization. Hands down, I'll always say that'll be my dream job. However, he wanted me to remain in Italy to do that. And as a family, it just wasn't going to be in our best interest. My wife is one of 7. The majority of them live here in Atlanta now. So I don't have any friends. I just have family now because there's enough of us. Fortunately, I get along really, really well with all of them. So I, had an opportunity to kind of jump into the management side of things, which would have been awesome. But decided to come home. And once again, the corporate structure really kind of, I remember telling my wife this, towards the end, because regardless, right? Like I had an awesome career. I'd play in Milan on a Sunday and Istanbul on a Tuesday and, Moscow on a Friday, right? Like it was unreal. But at the end of the day, it does become a job, and sometimes when you're so close and you've been doing it for so long, you don't really realize what you have, right? Like get to play in front of 10,000 people, get a nice check every month. They give me a house, they give me a car. I get to, eat pasta straight from the source. I get to climb the French Alps and pick mushrooms with, these crazy hunting dogs, right? Like all the cool stuff. But at the end of the day, it does become a job. And I was just at the point where it was kind of time to move on. And I remember telling my wife, like, I can't wait till I don't have to wake up at 8 a.m. and run my, tail off for the next 2 hours. I can't wait to get to an office, get in front of a computer, sip my coffee. And, about 2-3 years in, like my mind shifted a little bit. I'm like, I don't know if this is really what I wanted. But you know what? It gave me what I didn't always love what I did, post-career, didn't always love what I did, but I love what it afforded me to do, really, if that makes sense, And once again, I'm in another, very, corporate structure, but it's a tech company, and tech is completely different than kind of old school cable, like everybody's remote. My boss is like, listen, I don't care, if you work at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m, you take care of your customers, you hit your number and we're good. So it is my own business, like every quarter I've got obviously a quota to attain. But at the end of the day, it's been very cool how it is very hands off. So it really is about self-motivation. It's like I'm back in the gym, like I don't know cybersecurity. So I got to jump on for an hour or two and read an article 3 or 4 times before I really understand it. So for me, it really is getting back into the lab, honing your skills.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit about the Milan basketball team. Is it connected to AC Milan? Now, a lot of the European football clubs, soccer clubs are connected to basketball, like Fenerbahce, Barcelona, Real Madrid. Some aren't. What are the advantages when they are connected? And generally, the teams you played with, were they connected to the soccer teams as well?
Yeah, so typically, in Italy, that it wasn't the case. In Spain, it's more prominent. Like Real and Barcelona, both their basketball teams are affiliated with their football teams, right? I think CSKA Moscow which is another big organization in Europe. Fenerbahce. There's another team or two in Turkey that are as well. In any case, Milan, the Inter and Milan, because there's 2 teams, right? There's Inter and there's Milan. And I lived about, 10 minutes from San Siro, which is the big stadium that they would play in. One of the cool things about playing for Giorgio or for the Armani, Shield was we had very cool access to a lot of awesome events. So, I was able to kind of get into, several of those soccer games and be in some pretty cool spots, whether it's on the field or in a box. So that was kind of the only connection that we had. Every now and again, we'd see, Giorgio would have, Giorgio owned a bunch of stuff in Milan. So I remember we had dinner with David Beckham one night. Giorgio owned a Nobu. We had a team event. Beckham was there. Giorgio would kind of invite him to the table to say hello. So we didn't officially eat with them, but we got to meet him. And I think, I don't get starstruck, but, when that guy came into play, I mean, once again, he had like an orange glow to him, like he was just unbelievable soccer player, but really his brand really kind of, outweighed, the soccer player that he was. So, so I think the benefit would be obviously the budgets, right? Like these soccer teams like Barcelona and Real and Istanbul and Fenerbahce and CSKA have these unbelievable budgets, right? That can then trickle over to the basketball side of things. I would argue that Inter and Milan are the same way. Fortunately, when you have a global icon like Giorgio, owning the team, budget's not really going to be the issue. I also think that it helps build some brand loyalty there as well, right? Some brand infinity. Hey, I'm a big fan of, let's say, Inter and Milan, or Inter and Olimpia Milano were connected, which was the global team of the global name of the basketball team. Once again, I think you could kind of cross reference, fans and events, especially now, like how prominent social media is, and it's all about just kind of connecting the dots. So, I had a chance. Didn't have a chance. Before I went to Treviso, I had a chance to, my agent said it was down between me and another Bosman, which is another European player or an American player with a respective passport. So I was a Bosman because I was an American citizen, but I had my Italian citizenship as well. And it was down to me and another power forward for the final spot on the Barcelona team. And he's like, hey, the owner's on his boat out in the Mediterranean. He's going to come back in a week and I'll let you know. And then they inevitably ended up going with this other guy. But, how cool would that have been to kind of, jump on a team Barcelona? Because I was a huge soccer fan. And soccer was always my first sport, and I was pretty competitive up till I was about 13, 14 years old, until Irv Green was like, listen, man, look, you're going to be tall. Let's start building you, let's start getting you into year round, play. Let's really focus on basketball, which I did. And I kind of caught the bug, but how cool would it, I had an awesome time in Milan, going to the Inter and Milan games and all of those Champions League games. Barcelona would have been a really, really cool experience as well. And I think a lot of it is because of the affiliation with the soccer team. So the benefits, I think, just being affiliated, broader spectrum, more money. Milan and Italy, that wasn't really a thing, and I'm not sure why it was, but I can't recall any teams. Maybe Rome, maybe AC Roma, but honestly, I can't be sure, because I played in Bologna and I played for Virtus Bologna. And so Virtus and Fortitudo were, once again, that was like Inter and Milan. That was like Duke Carolina, these two prominent basketball teams in Europe. And, fortunately, I was able to play on it. That was when a guy named Ettore Messina was the coach. And Messina was George Popovich's head assistant for 5 years with the Spurs. Messina he coached in Italy for many years, won a bunch of championships. Then he went to CSKA Moscow and won 3 or 4 Euroleagues with them. Came over to the States, and I think was hoping to kind of get an opportunity to run, get a head coaching job. And then he ended up with Pop, and they had a good run for 4 or 5 years. And now Ettore is back. I don't even know who he's coaching. He may be coaching. Is it Milan? I think he's coaching a team back in Europe now. But nonetheless, really, 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 really good coach. And Bologna and Fortitudo were kind of the same situation, where like every game that we played, there were between Virtus's stadium was probably about 15,000. Fortitudo stadium was about 10,000, but much more compact. In every single game we played, there'd literally be the riot police going right down the middle in the stair section, because come the end of the game, once again, inevitably somebody's going to have a firework, somebody's going to have something that they're going to throw at people. And guys like to drink at games, and typically they're passionate, man. So these riot police and their full shields and batons and helmets were there to kind of keep the order, so to speak. And we all sat in plastic bubbles. You see it all the time because people throw stuff, like you can't do that here at an American sporting event, like you're going to get escorted out really quickly, and you're probably going to get sued, and you're going to get banned from that environment or from that stadium for probably life. In Europe, it's different. Yeah. Like they're quick to throw things at you, so if you win a game and you shouldn't have won that game, your best bet is to get out into the tunnel and get on that bus as quick as you can. Cause people are passionate about it.
It's interesting the way you use the word Bosman, because in soccer, that means your contract is out, you can leave for free. You use it as an extra domestic. You use it as an extra American player.
Yeah.
Through their hair. I didn't understand. I guess this Bosman guy had a lot of influence.
I guess.
Oh, yeah. Also about soccer. So I took my son to an Ajax game. He trained overseas, and in Ajax in Amsterdam, the visiting fans are kept behind in a fenced area. Yeah. And they are escorted in and escorted out by police. So they come in before and they leave way after. And Americans aren't used to that kind of hostility between supporters.
No, I get quick 2-minute story. So we are playing. I'm at Benetton Treviso. A guy named David Blatt was coaching at the time, who ended up coaching Cleveland, and then after a year or two, I think LeBron decided to go in a different direction. So David was escorted out of the Cleveland's organization, and I think he is at Maccabi Tel Aviv now, which obviously is another big time program. So Dave was coaching. We had a really good team. We were playing Naples. And Naples, obviously, you know, if you know anything about Naples soccer history and Maradona and all that stuff, like Naples is just an interesting place. And, you know, it's a bit lawless.
It's the South. They call it the
It's
South.
the south of Italy.
They have the stars
Exactly.
and bars. Yeah.
Exactly. So anybody who knows Italy knows that anything south of Rome, you know, can potentially be considered a completely different state. I loved them both. I had good experiences in both, but we're playing Naples. They needed the game. They needed to win the game to get to it was a EuroLeague game. They just so happened to have a good year previously. So it was a EuroLeague game. We had already qualified for the quarterfinals. They needed to beat us in order to qualify for the quarterfinals. We were at their gym, and basically, you know, I guess some of the Italian captains on Naples team kind of had some back channel conversations with some of the Italians on our team to be like, hey, any chance, you know, you guys can just kind of lay over, you don't need this. And you know, once again, it wasn't the case. Like we were gonna, you know, it was funny, man. It just shows you how different, you know, cultures kind of, you know, navigate through challenges. And so our Italian team basically mentioned like, hey guys, like they approached us and they said they really want this game, and we're not telling you to not play hard, but just like be careful out there. You know, they're going to come hard at you. So it was a close game, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Last 2 minutes of the game, they were up 3 or 4 points, and then they literally just started getting so tense and so nervous, and you could see their fans are getting nervous. They couldn't get a shot up. We hit a couple shots. We ended up winning by 3 or 4 points. And as soon as we won the game, the crowd rushed the floor, and the armed guards are telling us to get out. So we get out, we go through the locker room. You know, if you know construction in Southern Italy, you know, it's a little bit spotty at best as well. So they literally put up some sheet metal and some plywood to make a locker room. And all of a sudden the whole thing started moving. You know, our GM's on the phone. We're like, hey, you got to get these guys out. So we were in Naples. We were supposed to fly out the next morning. Fortunately, the team was owned by Gilberto Benetton, who of the Benetton, you know, clothing conglomerate. He had a fleet of jets at the time. So, you know, he said, hey, I'll send the jet to the airport. You guys just get to the airport and we'll fly you home. Well, as we're going onto the bus, you know, it's in a locked up kind of cage parking lot. The bus starts leaving. I promise you, Maldive cocktails being thrown at us, rocks being thrown at us, sticks being thrown at us, people banging on the bus. But for me, and I'm sitting there like, keep my head up, like, this is amazing. And everybody else is like, get down, get down. But that is, everybody always asks me, hey, what's the difference between playing hoops in Europe and playing hoops in America? And in my perception, you know, my humble opinion, there's such an entertainment value of sports in America. And it's not just about the guys on the court. It's about the food that you can get there. It's about the Chick-fil-A gift cards that are being dropped down from the rafters from a cow with a parachute. It's about the T-shirt gun. It's about the dance team and the lights and all that stuff. There's such an entertainment element to it. It's all about the experience. And it's not always about the wins and the losses. Where if you go to Europe, there is no experience. The experience is the win or the loss. And people, you know, for generations will support their team. And literally, if you lose a game, their weekend is shot. You know, they're like, oh, you guys are terrible. You guys are awful. You know, and so it really is all about the wins and the losses. You know, like some of these gyms are archaic, you know, and maybe you get a beer and a bag of popcorn, but that's it. You know, you're not getting your burgers or your hot dogs or your slices of pizza. And I played for a team in Reggio Emilia, which is right in the central part of Italy, right outside of Bologna. And we had a good season, but we ended up losing to a team that we shouldn't have. And I remember the next morning, I'm out getting a cafe and a brioche, and this lady who's proud, you know, she's probably 75, 80 years old. And she just comes up to me. She says, "Que schifo," and spit right at my foot. Que schifo means like, how terrible. You know, and once again, all I could do was I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't take offense to it. I was like, this is what you know. This is how committed and passionate and invested you are into this team. So I just took it as like, well, we should probably do better next time. But once again, that's the difference. You know, people are not afraid to friggin' spit at your feet if you don't play well. You know, whereas if you don't play well, if you got a big brand here in America, they're still going to want your autograph and take a picture with you. So that's a big difference in my opinion.
Well, that's one thing I love about soccer and basketball is that every country has its own flavor. Like, you know, in American football, no one else plays football. So it's, you know, we only know that one style.
Right.
Like for soccer in Europe, the English game is very athletic. They play fast down the wings. The Italian game is in the middle. It's very psychological. The Spanish game is little balls. German game is also very direct. Is basketball the same way? Do they play different basketball in different countries?
I think basketball is all contingent on the coach that you have. I don't think it's necessarily a national style, but you're right. Like, you know, I'd watch Italy. So, you know, Inter would score and then they just go sit on defense for the next, you know, 80 minutes. And I'm just like, whereas, you know, you watch Man U or Chelsea, they score once, they're trying to score again and again and again. You know, like the Premier League soccer for me lines up much more with kind of, you know, my mentality and how I want to watch soccer. I think it's totally coach contingent, right? Like David Blatt, you know, we had Tyus Edney as a point guard, 2 or 3 big guys who could really shoot the ball. And David's, you know, mentality was like the best defense is a good offense, always. And as soon as we got out, you know, he wanted to get a shot up as soon as he could, good shots. And we ran through the league that year. Guy like Ettore Messina, he's all about defense. You know, he's all about like, you gotta stop your guy. I want a low scoring, hard fought, you know, battle. And at times he was smart enough where he know when we had to pick it up and scale it back. But a lot of the Eastern European coaches, you know, the Eastern Bloc coaches, it was all about defense. And I mean, they, you know, a 55 to 60 point game, that was kind of their sweet spot. And once again, whether it was, you know, coaching in Spain or Italy or Turkey, wherever that coach went, he would take that mentality with him. Much different than soccer, where it's kind of like the coach has to adopt to their style. Whereas I think in basketball, the basketball or the style of play adopts to the coach's style. That's kind of how I'd position it.
That's interesting. Do the coaches in Europe, are there mentors or the people they study other European coaches, or do they study American basketball for coaching?
Yeah, I think so. Once again, I think when like the whole, you know, the whole bridge between Europe and you know, like the Danieloviches, right, the Stojakoviches, the Petroviches. Once, you know, Petrovic and those guys started coming over to the States, that's when I think that, you know, for so long, the bag on Europeans was like, oh, they're not very athletic. They're lazy. They're going to go smoke cigarettes at halftime and drink their coffees. Very fundamentally sound, but not necessarily super athletic. Then you got a guy like Ginobili, you know, or Batum, and, you know, obviously Dirk completely changed the game. You know, not the most athletic guy, but a 7-footer, you know, with a jump shot, arguably, you know, at the same level of Steph Curry, right? Like, so I think at one time it was like, you don't know what you don't know. And without the internet, you don't know some of the more successful coaches over in Europe, right? I know, you know, Ettore Messina, who's a genius and, you know, studied sports psychology as part of his craft to better understand how to pull the most out of a player and also as a unit, as a team. And I just know, like, once some of these Europeans, you know, started coming over and having success, you know, the NBA then put an international scout on every team to say, hey, let's go figure out who's going to be the next Luka Doncic. Let's go figure out who's going to be the next Tony Parker, you know. And I think Greg Popovich was one of those guys really hip to kind of saying, hey, we don't necessarily have to look, you know, in America to find some of the best talent out there. Let's go everywhere outside of America. And I mean, even Tim Duncan, right? Like, arguably, obviously he went to Wake Forest, but, you know, wasn't born, you know, in you know, was where was he born? Was born
Bahamas,
in the Bahamas? Yeah. So once again, not your traditional, you know, growing up in New York City or North Carolina. And then obviously with Ginobili and who was the third of the big three? Why am I missing? Tony Parker. There you go. The you know, obviously a very, very successful French guy. So I know that Ettore, I know, you know, he was a huge fan of Popovich's, started following him early, and that's kind of, and then Popovich would come over, and because Ettore was, you know, a really prominent, successful European coach, I think that was the strategy. Popovich was like, hey, let me bring this European guy who's had a lot of success in Europe, and let me pick his brain, and let's coordinate some, you know, some offenses that nobody's seen before. Let's work on some defenses that maybe people aren't expecting. And then obviously when you guys, it's such a different mentality too. And I don't want to, you know, I'm not bagging my countrymen by any means, but, you know, you get to the NBA and I think sometimes there's a sense of entitlement. You know, these 18-year-old kids are getting, you know, $20 million a year. And I'm not mad at them, man. If I could get $20 million a year, I'm in, you know, like, Oh, don't stay, one and done. Like, no, one and done and you can make money, go, like you'll always have a chance to come back and educate yourself, educate yourself on life, educate yourself on finances, educate yourself on relationships and how to build them and how to build trust. Right. But I think I just lost my train of thought here because I went down that rabbit hole.
You were talking about using Americans are too proud to use some of the things we might learn.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, if you get an American, right, and like, so once again, I think I use the David Blatt scenario, right? David Blatt was an unbelievable coach. He had Cleveland in the #1 spot in the East, yet that wasn't good enough because you know what? 5 or 6 guys on that team who may or may not have kind of, created an alliance to kind of see him out were making, 2, 3, 4 times as much as him, right? So the players have all the power. Over in Europe, it's a totally different ball game, man. Totally different ballgame. Coaches have all the power, and whether you're making €2 million a year, which is a lot of money over there, or $100,000 a year, if the coach isn't happy with you, you could be on a plane the next week. Like that's just how it goes. So there's a different level of respect almost, where like you could be a jerk, and if Ettore Messina is yelling at you, you can't do anything. However, you come to the NBA and you have a new coach that starts yelling at you. Who's, when all of a sudden things aren't working well, who are they going to go after? Are they going to go after the star player making all this money? Or are they going to go after the coach that nobody gets along with? Yeah. So much different approach to basketball, I think, in that sense. And I think, honestly, one of the reasons that that San Antonio had so much success was obviously Pop is an unbelievable X's and O's coach, unbelievable manager of personalities, but he also had these guys who are used to a kind of an aggressive, boisterous type of communication. And you'd see Pop get into Tim, you'd see Pop get into Ginobili, you'd see Pop dig into Tony, and they understood that and they accepted that. Go to it, in today's game, go to the LA Clippers, go to the Denver Nuggets, go to somebody, and try and scream and yell at the 3 or 4 best players and see what happens. You know what I mean? So much, once again, cultural mentality, much different here than versus Europe, from my opinion. Once again, this is just what I've seen over the last, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting is, we talked last week, a couple of weeks ago, how you started playing ball at the playgrounds and wrestling. There were so many options. You played all the time. But it's funny how our development now is more like European. It's academies or AAU and personal training is more like the academy system in Europe. Yeah. They develop their athletes in academies that are completely separate from their education.
Yeah.
The big players don't play for their college or their high schools. It's right. Different. Yeah. Did you notice that? What'd you think about the way that Europe develops their basketball players?
Well, what I love about Europe is they develop players and not positions. Right. So you have a guy like Jokic, who's a 7-footer, who can dribble, who can pass, who can shoot. Right. Typically, even in Irv Green and Wendell, as I got older, like they obviously expanded my boundaries a little bit. But, I was the tallest guy on the court. Get under the basket. You know what I mean? Where that's not the case over there, right? They teach their 7-footers how to dribble and pass, and they teach their 6-footers how to post up and defend. So that's what I really like about how they develop their players. But, they go to basketball school there, and education, and especially, one of the cool things was just really kind of getting to know different cultures, different people, different struggles that they went through. You know what I mean? I mean, I obviously, being from Reston, my struggle was mainly like, if I lose, I got to sit out for 2 hours. You know what I mean? I had a roof over my head. I knew where my next meal was coming from. I then went to DC, back on 14th and 14th and Florida Avenue. And once again, my dad would take some of these kids out to lunch on a Saturday after practice, because I was probably the only hot meal they were going to get. So like it helped me open my eyes to just different, income levels, socioeconomic challenges, right? In Europe, it's the same way, guys coming from Rome or, Milan or Paris, it's a bit different than some of these guys coming from like, the former Yugoslavia. I mean, I heard it from Sarajevo. I heard it from Croatians, from Serbians. Like, they used to be brothers, and then all of a sudden things went, sideways. And I heard different, hey, the reason it was because of this. And no, well, the reason that we broke off was because of this. You hear one thing in the news, but when you get to talk to people who are a part of it, that's a whole nother, that's just a whole nother perception of life. So when these kids are 10, 11 years old and people recognize them as having talent, and they don't go the traditional, high school route, they're saying, hey, let's go to basketball school where we're going to do basketball. We're going to flip the model on its head. rather than going to school from 9 to 2 or 9 to 3 and then practice from 5 to 7, we're going to go to basketball from 9 to 5, and then you're going to learn, you're going to do some addition and subtraction from 6 to 7, because a lot of times it's their only way out. And I think you see it as well from a national perspective, because these guys are playing together from the time they're 10, 12, 14 years old. I was fortunate enough to participate one summer with the Italian national team because I had my citizenship, and they were going, they were doing friendly games for the World Championships, which would eventually lead them to the silver medal in the Olympics. I obviously didn't get selected for the team, but I mean, I jumped in, and these guys had known each other for 15 years. There's a brotherhood there. I know Duke talks about it all the time. And our national team, I would argue that, obviously a lot of these guys are playing against each other in AAU, but they play against each other. They don't play with each other, and I know now USA basketball is starting to, build these teams a little bit earlier. And, Grant, I think, is going to do an awesome job with that, with that title and taking them into, kind of the next level of what they're going to do. But yeah, I love the way that European develops their players compared to the US. And I understand it, why they're putting some of these kids, where, 80% of their day is playing basketball, 20% of their day is learning, right? Where, here it's a little bit different. Although now, I mean, apparently you have these, these academies, these high schools that'll have 50 kids in them because they're factories, And once again, this gets into the whole, like, hey, some of these kids that they're, coming from, inner city or even rural areas that don't have the resources or there's a stable family life, or the commitment to bring these guys up. Their only chance, is playing a sport. So it's like, I love Calipari. I think there was a 30 for 30 about, I think it was called like One and Not Done or something. And it was all about Calipari talking about, listen, the one and done thing, like, I don't love it, but I'm going to do it, and I do it well, because for me, my job is not to educate these kids. My job is to try and develop generational wealth for these kids. And he doesn't apologize for it, and once again, the majority of kids, I would argue, that are coming from really tough environments probably aren't necessarily, are they getting into the Dukes or the UVAs or the Harvards on their own merit? Probably not. They just so happen to play a sport really well. So is that the system setting them up to fail, knowing that they don't have the foundation to do the work that's required of them? Totally different story. Got a lot of thoughts on that as well. However, we'll kind of keep it to Nova Legends and not the Joey Beard, philosophy of the world.
No, we left Joey. You got a lot of good things to say, man. When you're talking about how the European teams, the best players have played together for their lives, when you watch the French national team play, and your colleague Crawford Palmer has been involved with that team.
Yeah.
They one touch the ball around like a soccer team.
Yeah.
And you could tell these guys have been playing together since they were little kids. I mean, they know they don't have the talent the Americans have, obviously, but the way their chemistry is, it is beautiful to watch them play basketball.
It's unreal, man. And I played against Croft. So Croft, my first year when I was in Roanne, France, a Pro B team, second division team in France, right outside of Lyon, Crawford was playing for Villebon-Asvel, which was that was in Lyon. That was one of the big teams in Lyon at the time. And I believe he had his French citizenship as well. And I think that's where he eventually got into the national team and stuff like that. And so once again, like, Asvel was the prominent team in France. So they probably had 6 or 7 national team players on that team, and every other national player most likely was in Italy or Spain or Europe. They homegrown them. So not only were they getting their 2 or 3 friendly, boot camps every year, right before they prepare for the World Championships or the FIBA games, they were playing together every single day. The core of the national team was on Asvel Villebon. And so that, I would assume, that's the country, right? That's the big sponsor, because everything's privately owned over there. That's the sponsors committing to really building the foundation of the French national program to say, hey, look, we're a little team in France. However, we've got enough money to pay all these guys to keep them home so that they can build that chemistry and build that camaraderie. It all goes to, I think, Wayne Gretzky said it best, you don't go to where the puck is, you go where the puck is going. Right. And that's what, like you're describing. Guys know where they're going to cut. They know their habits. They know where they like the ball. They know where they don't like the ball. And I think that, you play with those guys every single day, and France is always competitive on the global, platform. Obviously the US is the US, and it's just, there's just unbelievable levels of talent, but there's also 350 million people in this country,
Yeah.
and it's not 30 million, right? So, statistically, you're going to have a better chance to build a good team when you have a lot more people to pick from. So, but yeah, you're right, man. I mean, those national teams, especially if you look at like Lithuania is a perfect example, right? A country of 2 million people.
Mm-hmm.
However, they have some of the most fundamentally sound basketball players and are always competing, for a medal in the European Championships and sometimes on the global scale. And once again, that is the prominent sport over there. Like we have basketball, football, baseball, hockey, soccer arguably is now becoming a bit more prominent as well. But in Lithuania, it is basketball. And from the time you can walk, you pick up a ball, and that's it. And it shows, a country of 2 million people, you always have really, really good players that are being developed. You want to party?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Party.
Even when the USSR was together, Lithuania dominated that team. They
absolutely.
Bonus, those guys were Lithuania. Well, look, I'm going to have to talk a little bit about Northern Virginia basketball because I know.
Yeah, man. Sorry about that.
This is great. I mean, I haven't talked a lot about European basketball. Crawford at one point was supposed to come on, but I mean, folks have not heard these stories. So this is awesome.
Yeah.
But one thing that we didn't talk about with South Lakes. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about when you're in 8th grade, when the team went to state, it was built around Rob Robinson and Grant. And you got two little guards, Michael Taylor, Michael Ellison. I think Chucky Gibson, and you had one more player. The team, it did well. They had great chemistry on that team. The next year was one of the tallest and one of the best, most talented teams in the history of the region. But it was a work in progress, but they brought you into the starting lineup. You had Josh Harwood, who was 6'6". You had Grant, who was 6'7", 6'8". And then you had Theron and Howard Hogan, who were both big, long guards. And you had this 1-3-1 zone. So tell us, and then the next year, after Grant graduated, we had this year where I couldn't even get Quinn to even talk about the year. He won't even discuss his junior year. I had a podcast with the 1991 Final Four, and it was West Springfield with Jamie Warren. It was Chantilly and Tim Fudd, and it was Bart Lamberson from Madison. Quinn was quiet. He did not even want to talk about that season. Talk a little bit about the transformation of the South Lakes teams during your time there.
So my freshman year, obviously we had a huge team, right? I mean, Grant, you got 6'8" running the point, and I myself was 6'8", 6'9", kind of holding down the center spot. I use that term holding down loosely because most people were kind of throwing me around. However, my whole key was just to try and, run faster than the next guy and be quicker to the ball than them. So we had a ton of size. That year, obviously with Howard and Theron, and they're both really, really good players. And those guys are still, I haven't talked to them for a while, but I'd see them and we're still buddies, right? I think Grant was receiving so much of the attention, and all of a sudden here's another freshman that's starting to get a ton of attention as well. And sometimes, I think that, from a chemistry perspective, right? Like to build the best chemistry, everybody's got to be bought in, right? Like it's all about what they say. It's all about the name on the front, not the name on the back, right? And I do think that, at times, sometimes, the notoriety and all the attention that was being given, sometimes, potentially kind of affected things, right? Like, hey, I can get 30. So you know what, I'm going to shoot enough shots to get me 30. And then that just disrupts the balance of everything. Right. Yeah. And I think that if we had, and what did I know, man? All I wanted to do is I just didn't want to get beat up. And so I kept my mouth shut. I'd be in the locker room, just put my head down, shower up and get out of there as quick as I could. Cause I was 14, 15 years old, with these grown men who I'd looked up to for the past couple of years. So, what could I say to be like, guys, we need to tighten up a little bit. Josh was kind of the glue. He was the voice of the team in the sense that like he was never afraid to step up to anybody and get in their face. You know what I mean? He was the defender. If somebody hit Grant too hard, Josh was up there to pick Grant up and to knock that guy on his ass the next time, he had a chance. Same thing with me. So Josh had this big brother enforcer mentality. He was Grant's enforcer. He was my big brother, and he was going to make sure that nothing else happened. Theron and Howard were both super, super talented people that if they were on any other team, those guys could potentially be first team all district. You know what I mean? So I think that, at times the chemistry was just, I just don't think that we were always on the same page, right? We'll just keep it to that. Our sophomore year, It's funny, man. I don't remember, like, I really don't remember like that being a bad year. I think that was my coming out party. So that was when I went from this freshman, who was scoring, 5-6 points a game to all of a sudden, I don't know what I averaged my sophomore year, but I was up there, and I was this, 16-year-old kid. Now all of a sudden, and I'd been, rated one of the higher kids in the DC area, through Hoop Scoop and some of those older publications. So like now that Grant was gone, now maybe a time when maybe the light would start shining on the seniors. Well, the light even got bigger on me, right? So now all of a sudden I'm the sophomore getting all the attention, getting all the notoriety. And once again, it may have been part of the imbalance of that chemistry. I say it all the time, man. People change when they want to change. And certain people have their own objectives and initiatives. And sometimes those trump or outweigh the objectives of the team. For me, like I just, it's in my DNA, man. I'm a team guy, right? Like I'm not an individual sport guy. I'm not good at golf. I'm not good at tennis. I like playing them both, but I won't put in the time to get better at any of them because I still prefer to play soccer. That's what I do now to stay in shape, man. I play soccer 2-3 days a week. Awesome. I try and play basketball, but my problem is I don't want to play in the 40 and over league. I want to play with the college kids, and I just can't compete nearly that much. So I think, freshman year, obviously, couple of guys were just coming into varsity and probably wanted a few more shots, wanted a little bit more attention. Grant was taking most of it, and any of the reciprocal, or any of the, the runoff, it was coming my way. And then once Grant left, like, once again, I think that spotlight grew brighter on me. And maybe that was part of the issue. I think my junior year, that year when Quinn was a senior, obviously he had his injury his senior year, correct? With his ankle. So that was a year that basically 65 or 70% of the team were the AAU team that Irv Green had put together 4 or 5 years ago. So it was myself, it was Troy, it was Mike Summy, Emmanuel Ramey. We had a guy named Sean Hager, John O'Leary, John Kemmer, like all these guys, we all grew up playing together. And I think really and then junior year, obviously that was when, I took it to a whole nother level. Everybody was bought in. And I think because arguably I was one of the leaders of the team. And I think I approached the game with a team mentality. I would get in the gym early. I never felt like I was worthy of more attention than anybody else. And I think I would think that kind of fed into everybody else. And that really kind of helped nurture and foster that, like, hey, it's team first, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I just think that, the personalities my junior year just all blended really well together, and I think that was one of the big reasons why we did have so much success that year. Obviously, until we got to states, and then you meet one of the Southern teams, and there's something in the water there, man.
Well, when South Lakes would play, when Grant was there, but you guys kept the momentum after Grant left. Mm-hmm. It was like it had the environment of a Mike Tyson fight when you guys would come out to Robinson or even your home games on a Friday night. The crowds were enthusiastic. Everybody wanted to be there. If you didn't get there on time for certain gyms, you weren't even going to get. How would you compare that environment there with Cameron Indoor and other tough places like Holt Fieldhouse that you played in college?
Yeah, I think it was awesome because that type of environment, I think, prepared me for a Dean Dome or a Cameron Indoor Stadium or a Colt Fieldhouse. I mean, I will tell you, of all the gyms I've played, and I played a bunch, there's nothing like Cameron Indoor Stadium, right? I mean, it's literally cramming 12,000, 13,000 people into a gym that was meant for 7,000 or 8,000 people. Excuse me one sec. Sure. My dog scratching at the door. So Cameron was just, I think Cameron was, well, obviously just taking it back to South Lakes, like, and maybe because there wasn't a whole lot else to do in Reston, right? Like some of these Southern football programs here, like, they have football stadiums that have 20, 25,000 people, and every Friday night it's packed because that's the only thing going on. Arguably in Reston, because Reston at the time, didn't even have the town center, right? So Reston was like, there weren't cell phones, there wasn't the internet. So when people were looking for something to do, it just, South Lakes had such a good program that obviously everybody's attracted to winning, right? So I think that, that was part of kind of the environment. I think also, once again, you had to get in front of people to interact with folks, right? Today, you can have full-on relationships via, a screen, texting or social platforms, whatever. there you still had to physically get out, be present. And I think that in high school, man, people wanted to be around each other. People wanted to support, the folks that they took math class with and that they took, social studies with. So I think that was a big part of it. Plus it was just, I mean, we had such a fun style of basketball. You got Grant, this pioneer, 6'8", coming down the court, handling the ball or catching alley oops. And then I kind of was doing the same thing, not to his level, but but I was still kind of carried the baton forward. So I think a big part of it was because we were good. People, I think, enjoyed the style of basketball that we played, and there may not have been a whole lot else to do. And then, you know how it is, a snowball effect. Once you get to one or two, it's going to grow. And man, those games were so fun. And then getting to Cameron Indoor Stadium, I mean, you could go there 2 hours before the game, right? And you'd see literally a line, people who camped out, for tickets. And we'd be walking in, and all of a sudden, people would be chanting your name. I didn't even play, right? But they'd be chanting my name. I remember on a recruiting trip when Grant they were playing the Fab Five at Cameron. I think that was my junior or senior year. I think it might have been my senior year, junior or senior year. And they were playing the Fab Five, and that was Chris Webber and Jalen Rose and Juwan Howard and all those guys. And then it was Grant, and it might have, if Bob was there, then that would have been my junior year. But regardless, I was being heavily recruited at the time. This was pre-game, I think I had practice that day. So I drove down with a couple buddies, walked in the gym, and we were probably still 10 minutes before tip-off, and the entire stadium, as soon as I walked in, started yelling, "Joey Beard, we want you, Joey." And it's like, how am I not going to say, how do you say no to that? But they're so committed. They're so passionate, like the Cameron Crazies. Obviously, like Duke, Coach K has built that program to really, like Duke is as known for its basketball program as it is for its academic, prestige, right?
It's true, yeah.
So it's like, he's really, taken that brand to a whole nother level. And I would argue, I mean, I heard a stat, like whenever Duke makes the Final Four in basketball, I think applications increase by like 4 or 5x. So people want to be a part of that energy. And it's just, once again, it's like, it's almost like, the freshmen and sophomores come in and the juniors and seniors are pulling them up. And then when the new freshmen and sophomore are coming in, the juniors, like that's part of Cameron Indoor Stadium. That is the energy. And, people just, I mean, that's just unbelievable experience. Dean Dome was super cool. I mean, it's 25,000 people screaming and cheering, but you ask anybody, and I would argue that, Duke Cameron Indoor Stadium is the apex mountain of some of their playing careers. So that's kind of, I think playing in such a cool environment in high school kind of prepared me for that environment as well. And it was just, once again, it's college sports. It's still my favorite thing to watch on TV is college sports, whether it's college football, college basketball, or any of the other, soccer even. I'll even watch, like, I'm not a big lacrosse fan, but if the NCAA finals are on, I'll watch it just because, once again, it's still, it's kids that are, still doing it for the right reasons, I think.
One thing you mentioned a couple weeks ago is that you said, I'm a 6'10" white guy. They do well at Duke. That's always the quote. So I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to be offensive.
No.
But,
well,
but Duke has evolved. Coach Krzyzewski has embraced the one and done type of athlete. When he was recruiting Joey Beard and Grant Hill, Johnny Dawkins, Tom Amber, those guys, he was recruiting four-year scholar athletes. But Krzyzewski has evolved over time. What are your thoughts on that?
I think he's had to in order to compete. I mean, obviously, the last, 5, 6, 7 years, I mean, some of the guys, I don't know how many number one picks he's had in there, but between the Kyrie Irvings and the, and the Zions and the RJ Barretts and now, Paulo, what's it, Banchieri, whatever his name is, who's really, really good. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't mean to butcher his name. Who's really, really good, who will be a top 2, top 3 guy. I think you have to play that game. I think Calipari was really good at it. And then I think Coach K realized, like, listen, if I want to compete and if I want to get, continue to kind of compete at a high level and potentially, have a chance at another title, I got to do it. I think Carolina was a little bit different, right? And I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just Roy saying, listen, I don't want to be a platform for one and done. I want to build, chemistry. I want to build, 2, 3, 4-year players. Now, obviously there were some one and dones or some 2-year and dones. And maybe he just, maybe because he didn't do it at nearly the pace Coach K did, maybe some of the recruits at that point were just like, you know what? coach knows I'm going to be out next year, and he's going to do everything he can to kind of develop me so I can be game ready, day one when I get to the NBA. Once again, I don't pretend to think I know what Coach K is thinking, but I would assume if I'm a coach in that position, if I want to be competitive, then I got to play that game too. What you see happening though is obviously, these kids, like, they're still kids, right? So once you get to the Sweet 16s, the Elite Eights, and now all of a sudden you see these mid-market teams, these mid-level teams that now have predominantly juniors and seniors. They can compete with like your Dukes and your North Carolinas, because the Dukes and the North Carolinas and some of these other prominent programs are built on 18-year-old, freshmen, right? 2 or 3 of them. Whereas you can go up against like a Gonzaga, right? Like now, arguably this guy, Chase, what's the big long kid's name? Chet Holmgren.
Yes.
He arguably is going to be a one and done, but for the most part, Mark Few has done a really good job with that program to really develop them and have, these guys shine and still be NBA ready. But when they're junior seniors. So I think he's done a real good job at that. Coach K, he's smart, man. He pivots when he has to, when I was being recruited, once again, and I don't say it's not a racial thing. Coach K is clearly not a racist by any means. I'm just saying, typically, if you look at a 6'10" white guy who was kind of a power forward who could shoot a little bit, they typically did well at Duke. It just so happened, and I think they could still do well at Duke, but it just so happens that a lot of these one and done guys don't happen to be 6'10" and white. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when I was talking to Mike Tissell, you might not know Mike, but Mike went to Robinson. He was older than me. He was class of '79, but played at Duke for 4 years.
Okay.
He was there Coach Krzyzewski's first year.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
He was very careful with how he said it, but didn't sound like he was a huge fan. But because Bill Foster had recruited him, and Foster was also a really good coach. One thing he said about Coach K was Coach K could not teach his own defense. He had never taught it before. Yeah. And so when he tried, it was just funny. But there are things that you remember about Coach K that may surprise us?
Well, no, it's just, when I left, obviously there was a bit of, there's a bit of tempestuousness and some there was just some communication that surprised me a little bit, and we'll kind of keep that to ourselves. I think at the end of the day, when I left, Coach K was really, I think when I peel it all back, I think he was just really upset that it didn't work out. I think I had a good relationship with him, and I think he really liked me as a recruit. I think he liked my family. I think he knew I came from where Grant was, and I think he really wanted it to work out. And I think that one thing about Coach K is, in my view, is he's almost addicted to winning, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just like, Coach is going to do, whatever he can do to gain an advantage and win. That's not a bad thing. So I think when I ended up leaving, it just, that just, for him, it's like, wait, why would you leave the family? You know what I mean? Like, why would you leave, this paradise? And I think as much as anything, because we've kissed and made up. I mean, we've spoke several times since I've left, and once again, it's water under the bridge for both of us. And I wish the guy nothing but success, and happy about his retirement, and we'll be interested to kind of see what he does next. He's such a, obviously in front of the camera, he's such a polished communicator, and obviously you can see Coach K get fired up, and you can see him put his hand over his mouth at time, because there's hot mics everywhere, right? But his, his, call it anger or passion for the game, was something that I'd never seen before, Coach K, he gets people fired up. He gets, he really, I think he does. He is a good motivator, I mean, as good as X's and O's coaches that he is, he would just do certain things, that would really kind of pull things together. And I think, really kind of pull the best out of not only each individual player, but, as a collective whole. But yeah, man, that guy's temper, I never, and maybe it was just directed towards me because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, once again, man, he's such an accredited coach. I mean, when he's, his brand is, is just arguably, one of the most popular ones in sports, not just college sports, but in sports in general. But he would have some curt words for us from time to time if we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing. And yeah, I get the zone, man. But for Coach K, everything was a battle about him. He's a military guy, right? So I think a lot of times he would kind of correlate, the game with the military and like, hey, you have a battle against your guy. We have a war as a team, but your guy is your battle. And we're not going to go and sit back in the paint and hope that they miss a jump shot. We're going to proactively go after that guy and try and win that battle. So once again, that was kind of my approach as to why he might not like zone defense. But I also know that Coach K didn't like the one and done situations too. That's not his, or I would assume that's not his first choice. I think he bleeds blue. He's established this brotherhood, right? To where like, Duke, you get in there and you're in the brotherhood for life, because I think he wears his heart on his sleeve. I think Duke is given as much to him as he's given to Duke. And I think that, he would love for people to come there, for 4 years, because develop those relationships, develop, that chemistry, be part of the family, grow as a family, fight and argue as a family, but resolve it as a family. He is a family man. I will, it's one big thing. Every time a recruit would come there was typically some sort of, barbecue or meal with his house or in his family. His family was always around, his daughters and his wife at the time, who I think Debbie's still, I think obviously they're still married. So he's a total family man, but man, that temper of his, I'm sure I'm not the only guy who's told you that. It would peek its head every now and again, man.
Yeah, I think we've all seen it on TV before, so I don't think it's a huge secret. Well, let's get Boston U its due. I knew Coach Wolfe. He was at UVA when I was there, so I used to play pickup ball with him. He was a good player.
Cool.
Very, very surprisingly good player.
Yeah.
What was his coaching style? What was he like to play for?
So Coach, I tell you that Coach K, had a temper. Coach Wolfe, which I never expected, because as an assistant coach, it's a completely different role, right? Like you were there to build, you were there to pick up the pieces and put them back together. You're there to, hey, Julian, I know you just got your butt ripped open, because you weren't getting, you weren't making that rotation, but you got this, man. Like, I got you. You can do this. It's all about building players up, right? Well, once you take on that head role, it's a different beast. And he was a much different head coach than he was an assistant coach. Not at his core, because at his core, he is who he is. Like, he's a New Yorker, he's gonna come at you. But he's gonna support you, and he's gonna try and do everything he can to help you. Like, that's one thing about Wolfe that I'll always give him credit for. He's always going to try and do what's right by you. But yeah, some of the words that came out of his mouth in some of those film sessions, I was having flashbacks to being at Duke after we lost a game we shouldn't have. But he was super passionate. He was super fiery. And one thing about Coach is, like, he could deal with really tough personalities, right? Like, Duke has the luxury of recruiting from the best of the best. They have the best pool, but they have a bubble within that pool that they can recruit from. And a lot of times, fortunately, they can be a bit, they can pick and choose kind of based on personalities. You can be like, well, that kid could be a headache. He could be a problem because we've heard some stuff about his past. Some programs are like, well, we got to take that risk because he's so good that we got to take that chance. Whereas Duke probably had 3 or 4 other guys on their depth charts that would be like, you know what? He might not be as good, but he's still a pro, and he's going to have a lot better attitude. So he's going to be a lot easier to mold into, to kind of transition into this team environment. So, Wolfe, he get a couple guys from New York, a couple guys from Boston, who some would consider knuckleheads, not in a bad way, but they would challenge him. And Coach, and similar to Coach Byrd, you know what I mean? Like, people would challenge Coach Byrd and he would dig his heels in and be like, no. But Coach Wolfe had a really good way of managing personalities, even some of the knuckleheads, that, might not get a chance otherwise, because he had to take those chances. He was a young coach, new coach at BU, competing against a hockey school, competing in the Northeast, where, like, who's ever heard of BU now, because of, Kyrie Irving's father, Dredrick Irving, who was the, one of the best players at BU ever. People may know about BU because of that. But people know about Boston University as a hockey school. So I think Coach coming in was really trying to establish himself, and he got a couple good recruits, a couple good transfers And he would take some chances on folks who had a lot of potential, but maybe needed some polishing. And it's, some of those confrontations were comical, man. But he was always really good at kind of navigating, how hard to push, but then also once he did, kind of when to kind of start building the pieces back up and get those people back to, the best version of themselves.
Yeah. Well, your second year there, your junior year, you guys had an unbelievable season. I think you go
Yep.
25-5. Another guy you may have known from Northern Virginia named Billy Beal from West Potomac.
Yeah.
And a guy named Owajobi was the leading scorer.
Tunji Awajobi. Yep.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that season.
Yeah. So that was kind of, that Tunji's senior year, my junior year, that was probably the pinnacle of BU basketball. Billy Beal came in there and he was just such a sharpshooter. Really, really talented, kind of like a Tyler Hero-esque, obviously Tyler Hero is playing, at a different level, but Billy was kind of that guy, just had a no fear attitude, could create his own shot, really, really talented, 3-point shooter, and also a big personality as well. We had a couple of them on the team that year, but once again, that was a chemistry where like every time we would go out as a team, we were going out together. And I think that was a big part of it. Tunji was a unique situation. Tunji had stats that I think only like Marcus Camby, David Robinson, and one other person had. And that was basically like 2,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, and like 300 blocks or something. And he was doing this at like 6'7". Now, Tunj was a unique individual where, the first day I got there in practice, Tunj was warming up, and we were all doing our stretches and stuff. And Tunj was walking around with a toothpick in his mouth, just kind of being Tunji, because that's kind of what he did. And coach said, "Tunj, you gonna warm up? You can get ready for practice?" He said, "Coach, I'm good." Took one step, tapped his head on the rim, and came back down and said, "I'm good, coach." I mean, that's the type of athleticism this kid had. He was literally a baby Akeem. Like the move, he had some of the best post moves that you could ever imagine, and he was so strong. I think he was a borderline Olympic boxer at age 15. He had a Zeus build, and he was the quickest. People would sometimes slap box with him, and we would stop it real quick because he'd get 3 in before you could even get your hands up. So he was just super, super athletic, super talented. Unfortunately, kind of laid an egg, the against Tulsa when we played him in the first round of the tournament. I think there was a ton of pressure on him. I think the Celtics liked him as kind of a role guy. So I just felt like, this was really his big, like I think he was averaging like 25 and 12 or something that year. He just super, super talented. And I think unfortunately just, he had a bad game. I remember he went on then to try out with the Celtics in their summer league, and I think they really liked him, but I think they were looking at him more as a role player, and Tunj just wasn't used to playing that role, and I don't think he wanted to play that role. Mm-hmm. So I think, it just got to a point where Europe was going to make the most sense for him, and then we ended up playing against each other a few times. So we had a good run there. The other guy that, really probably had the best career out of all of us was Raj Abel. So Raj was obviously he was there as freshman. Did he leave after his sophomore or junior year?
Yeah, he was only there 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so I don't know if he was part of my junior year or if he had already.
No, yeah, he wasn't there junior. That year he wasn't there.
Okay, so he had left, and Raj was one of those late bloomers, but Raj, you could tell, like, he was a gym rat, and he would just kind of be in that gym nonstop, and big 6'5", long guard, athletic, could really shoot. And then his story is really cool. He ended up going back to Florida Atlantic or FIU to be closer to home. I think he's a Miami kid. He wanted to get back home, and then had a pretty good career, finished out his career, and then basically kind of was starting to playing some G League stuff, and eventually I think later that year ended up playing for the Sixers, and started defending Kobe, and then he had a really good career. Ended up playing with Steve Nash for a while at Phoenix. So there's a lot of talent. Coach Wolfe was he was really good at recruiting. Really, really good at recruiting. He could connect with people really, really well, whether you're from the Northern Virginia suburbs or whether you're from one of the 5 boroughs from New York City. He was really good because he was that New Yorker guy. He had that that swag and that accent, and knew everybody. So I think people, from a recruiting perspective, he did a really, really good job at that. And then coaching, he was always one of those guys. He liked to have fun. He liked to obviously he liked to win. But some of those film sessions were rough too, man. Like he some of the things that came out of his mouth would make me blush. I'm like, did you just say that? I don't think you're supposed to say that, man. But once again, man, just passionate about it. And I always say he just was trying to keep himself warm, from those cold New England winters. That's why I was always getting fired up.
Yeah. Well, look, Joey, this has been great, man. You've got so much great material and great opinions. I really appreciate you doing this. But I would like to end by talking about your coaching. I know you have a daughter, I believe, that plays, you coach. Who has influenced you the most in coaching? You've coached for Coach K, one of the most successful coaches in the history of the game. Yep. Coach Byrd, one of the most successful coaches in the history of Virginia. You coach for great European coaches, a great personality like Coach Wolfe. Where is your coaching? Who'd you learn the most from? So I have two sons. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. Okay. My 14-year-old is just starting to get into basketball. Actually both of them are. They're, once again, Atlanta's a soccer town, right? So they're more Atlanta United jerseys than anywhere else. And one thing that I've tried not to do is put too much pressure on my kids to do anything other than something that they want to do. My wife was, she played volleyball on a couple professional teams with me when I was overseas. And then she was a really, really good beach volleyball player and would chase the AVP in the summers during our hiatuses in Europe. And then she went to Boston University and played tennis there. So she actually changed sports her last year. And so she experienced some success as well. So for me, all I want to do is I love the sport and I love coaching kids, right? And I ended up coaching at a high school here in Atlanta called Paideia, which is a pretty established private school here in Atlanta. And there's a lot of them here in Atlanta, but a lot of athletic factories, right? There's some really, really good private schools that have a ton of money for their athletic departments. So you see a lot of baseball, football, basketball guys coming out of Atlanta. Paideia, this school it's not one of those factories. It truly is academic focused. I ended up coaching the women's team because a friend of a friend knew the athletic director here. We got to talk and he's like, look, we had a coach here that was here for 20 years and it was just a tough experience. I'm trying to shift the culture here. Are we going to win state championships? Probably not, but I want to be competitive. I want a platform for these kids to come and compete and to get better, both as people and young men or young women. The boys team had already kind of had what they had. I told him, I was like, I can't be the head coach. I was running restaurants at the time and I'm just like, my schedule's too hectic. So he brought on a former college athlete. She played at Western Carolina and then coached for a couple college benches, kind of tapped out of the coaching world, went up to New York City to chase a tech job. And after a couple of years realized that's not for me. So she came back down, she took over the role. Her and I met and just kind of fell in love with each other, on a professional level. And we're both positive people. And that's kind of how we approach the game. I mean, I've learned so much, so much about mentality from Ettore Messina, so much about commitment and passion and what it takes to be really good from Coach K, so much about personality management from a guy like David Blatt, and so much about the ability to connect with your players, because that's how you're going to get the most out of them from a guy like Coach Wolfe. So I think that, my coaching style is much different than all of them, man. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of the Big Lebowski when it comes to coaching, where it's just like, hey, that's my opinion, man. And, do what you want to do. But I'm laid back. My whole philosophy is kind of, my whole thing with changing a high school program that had kind of such a dark stain on it and really reestablishing and redeveloping that brand to be like, hey guys, look, it's different here. And you can't say it, right? You got to do it. And that doesn't happen overnight. So really we just we started having impromptu shoot arounds. We'd have meet and greet with the parents just to let them get to know us. And really the thing is, listen, there's so many good traits that come from team sports, that's gonna, you want your daughters to go to the Harvards, and that's the kind of school Paideia is. They send kids to Harvard and Duke and NYU and Princeton and a lot of other schools. So it really is academically focused. But my point to them is there's so many good traits that they can develop through team sports. And I think we talked about it last time, from navigating challenges, being statistic driven, commitment to the team, working together to achieve a common goal, right?
right? So when I started speaking, and these are all very prominent captains in their industry, right? This is a very expensive school. So I think when people started to understand like, oh, so it's not just about the wins and the losses. And my whole thing is like, don't focus on the result, focus on your tactic, focus on dribbling, focus on getting open. The results are going to take care of themselves. We can't control that. What we can do is control what we can do now. And so I've had to change. Like I said, I've coached boys. I coached at Emory for 2 years. Once again, I was an assistant coach. And I was the guy, when guys were kind of feeling down, I'd try and build them back up a little bit, or, I'd get in the gym with them a little bit and just kind of tell them some stories and, put their minds at ease and work on their craft. But for me, I think like if I was ever to, become a prominent coach, I think my coaching style would be much more like a Steve Kerr than anybody else, like really just kind of cerebral, really focusing on kind of the who focusing on players and how they blend well together and managing those personalities. I mean, he's obviously got the luxury of having a bunch of Bentleys on his team, right? So that helps. But, really so much of it is, I love the fact that, one game he turned he said, hey, coaching staff isn't going to sit here this game. Andre, you and the team are going to work through it together. Like, it's out of the box thinking, and that's what I like about his style. David Blatt, I love the way that he really approached things. Very rarely was he ever kind of degrading a player, like ripping them down. It was always like, if he was ever yelling at you, it was like, you can do better. You can do better. And I like that. Like, for me personally, I don't like digging into somebody, it's just not my style. You can motivate somebody, but there's a way to motivate and there's a way to disrespect, I think, and just because I have the title as coach doesn't mean that I have the right to disrespect anybody. If they're being lazy, all I do is, hey, look, you got 2 more minutes to figure this out. Otherwise you're coming to sit with me. And that's it. I'm not going to fight you on this, and it seemed to work. Our first year, I think at Paideia, we went like 15-9. Our second year, we went like 22-7 or something like that. So we started, building this platform and starting to pull athletes from other sports that didn't really have a basketball IQ or basketball skills, but because I knew they were good at soccer, because I knew they were good at lacrosse, we would start kind of targeting those people. Hey, just come on out. Because at the end of the day, we would just, we had one girl who actually, we had 2 girls. One girl who went on to get a scholarship at UNC Asheville, and another girl who went to play at Wash U, which is a pretty prominent Division III school. Other than that, man, we had a bunch of soccer players, tennis players, and we were just really focused on, look, we're probably not going to teach you how to knock down 3-pointers overnight. So what we can do is, we're in better shape than anybody. So let's leverage that and let's just press nonstop and try and make layups. And it seemed to work. So yeah. So if I was ever going to be, if I ever got up to the big time coaching, I say this now, who knows, maybe I get there and my head goes crazy, but I typically like to sit down for most of the game and not stand up.
Exactly.
It's kind of my style.
Yeah, when you were describing Steve Kerr, it reminds me of my son. He's a very cerebral soccer player. He's always telling me, "Don't give me a bunch of rah-rah stuff. Just tell me what I need to do, coach." Because I just want to figure things out. I don't want to be inspired. Yeah. But anyway, well, Joey, look, you had such an amazing high school career. You're so humble and almost apologetic about your Duke career. Not many players could not even be recruited by Coach K. And it was only a matter of time before you worked your way into that rotation. We all know that. Yeah. But you got back on your feet. You did great at Boston. You got to the tournament. You had this amazing career overseas. I'm just glad I got a chance to talk to you and get a chance to know you. Hopefully we can connect on some sales. Maybe we can do some networking. But also love to get on some podcasts in the future, maybe some Duke guys or whatever.
Love it, man.
Have some
love it. Yeah. No, I would absolutely love it. And like I said, I've still got I'm still friendly with like the Steve Wojciechowskis and the Chris Collins and the Jeff Capels. And honestly, I know Wojo, I mean, he's from Maryland, but he might be a part of the Nova crew by vicinity.
We'll take him.
It would be interesting if you were able to kind of pull, some of the coaches together, like the TAs and the Johnny Dawkins and the Bobby Hurleys and everybody else. Cause it's such a pedigree. I mean, and I think that like, coaches what he's done on the court from a wins and loss perspective, but also like what a lot of people, they know it, but they don't really talk about is the amount of talent that he's fostered from a coaching perspective too. Mm-hmm. Kenny Blakeney, I put him in that. I think Kenny, like, I like Kenny a lot, man. Kenny, and I like all those guys. Love Coach Bray. He's done great. Obviously, Tommy's done really well at Harvard. You know, Wojo was at Marquette, had a couple good years. Chris is still doing his thing. Jeff's at Pitt. That's a tough situation being in an ACC school, up there competing with the Dukes and the Carolinas. But and then Bobby is doing his thing, but his ability to kind of foster coaching, because I think that's the kind of players that he recruits. He recruits thinkers. It's not just athletes. And some guys who will never be a coach. You're like, that guy will never be a coach. But obviously, he just, and a lot of those guys are point guards, right? So I think that's one thing, is like he really looks at, from a cerebral approach as well. Like, obviously this guy can play, but can he lead? Can he get people to buy in? Is he committed? So all of these coaches that he's developed, I think that's a big part of it. And he saw that probably early in their careers when they were 14, 15 years old and he started recruiting them. So so that would be a podcast I'd be interested in listening to, is just and hearing some of the stories that those guys, because I'm sure they still have really good relationships with him too. And now, what is that relationship like from coach to player to colleague? Yeah. I guarantee you everybody still calls him Coach K.
Yeah,
I guarantee you no one calls him Mike.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that would be a lot. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But look, I know your fiscal year is over soon. I hope you crush your number, and then mine started January 1st. I'm already working on my next one. So I hope, I wish you the best of luck this year.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll circle back, talk business, because I know it looks like you're involved with law firms, and we've got very friendly relationships, a lot of them, due to, the way that the world is and how we're able to kind of come in and clean up some messes. So we'll talk offline about that. That probably doesn't need to be a podcast, but look forward to connecting with you on that level. And it's been a real treat to get to know you, man. I've heard your name. I've seen kind of some of the podcasts, and it's fun because it kind of brought me back and reconnected me with some of my old buds who I'll be staying in touch with kind of moving forward. So I do appreciate it, Julian.
Well, Joey, you know this, but you got a real talent. I got a lot of great feedback on what you were talking about on the last podcast. So I appreciate it. People were really happy to hear from you. So I appreciate it, man. Yeah. I mean, we're a close-knit community. So
yeah, no, we really are. And like I said, I mean, we talk for a living at this point, right? But like I said, I try and be transparent. I try and be honest. Hopefully it comes across. It's the same thing that I try and do on the podcast, and being as honest and transparent as I can. And it seemed to work. So it doesn't get me in trouble, because then I don't have to remember if I'm telling fibs or not. So
exactly. Yeah, it's the whole Glenn Ross thing. And
that's it.
The easiest thing to remember is tell the truth. Right?
That's it. Coffee's for closers, baby. I always got a pot brewing.
Exactly.
All right, man. Well, yeah, let's definitely stay in touch, Julian. I appreciate it. Any other podcast you want me to be a part of, I'm happy to. It's been a real treat getting to know you.
I appreciate that, Joey. Yeah, well, we'll definitely do that, and let's definitely keep in touch.
Sounds good, man. All right. Okay, have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, have a good Sunday, man.
You as well. Yeah. Thanks, Julian.
All right, take care.